You've probably asked yourself this question before, maybe late at night staring at the ceiling, wondering why, despite all your effort, despite all your promises to yourself, you keep falling into the same patterns. Why you swear that tomorrow will be different, but somehow tomorrow ends up looking a lot like yesterday. Why you set goals, make plans, even feel motivated for a while, but eventually slip back into the same old cycle. Why is change so hard? Why does it feel like no matter how much effort you put in, something inside you keeps pulling you back? You're not alone in this. In fact, it's one of the most universal struggles of being human. Every one of us has some version of this story. Why is change so hard? Maybe for you it's breaking a bad habit, like scrolling endlessly on your phone. Maybe it's trying to eat healthier, exercise consistently, or finally finish that project you've been talking about for months. Or maybe it's something deeper, like trying to be less anxious, more confident, more present in your relationships. Whatever it is, you've felt that gap between who you are and who you want to be. And you've also felt the sting of failing to close that gap. And here's the first truth we need to face. The reason change is so hard is not because you're lazy, or broken, or weak. It's because change is going directly against how your brain is wired. For millions of years, human beings survived not by constantly reinventing themselves, but by repeating what worked. Habits were life-saving. Routines meant safety. The brain learned to conserve energy by automating behaviors, so you didn't have to consciously think about every little action. That's why research shows that around 40 to 50% of what you do every single day isn't actually a decision. It's a habit, running almost on autopilot. Think about that. Half of your life is being lived out of habit loops that you don't even consciously choose. So when you try to change, you're not just fighting against bad decisions or lack of willpower. You're fighting against neural pathways that have been carved into your brain through years, sometimes decades, of repetition. That's like trying to change the course of a river with a cup in your hand. No wonder it feels impossible sometimes. But there's another layer to this. The habits you want to change aren't just habits, they're coping mechanisms. They're strategies your mind and body developed to keep you comfortable, to keep you safe, even if in the long run they're not serving you. Maybe procrastination protects you from the fear of failure. Maybe overeating numbs your anxiety for a while. Maybe staying stuck in the same job, the same relationship, the same identity feels safer than facing the unknown. And so even when you say you want to change, some part of you resists, because on a deeper level, the old pattern is protecting you. This is why effort alone doesn't always work, because you're trying to fight yourself. You're pushing against an invisible wall, and the more you push, the more resistance you feel. Psychologists call this homeostasis, the tendency of systems, including the human mind, to resist change and maintain stability. And this is why so many people make resolutions on January 1st, only to give them up by February. Statistics show that over 80% of New Year's resolutions fail, not because people aren't trying, but because they're trying to force radical change without understanding the forces that are holding them in place. So here's the paradox. You want to change, but the very system that makes you who you are, the brain, the nervous system, the habits and coping strategies you've developed, has no interest in change. Its main goal is to keep you safe and predictable. And here's the kicker. To your brain, familiar suffering often feels safer than unfamiliar happiness. That's why people stay in toxic relationships, destructive routines, or self-sabotaging cycles, because at least it feels familiar, and the human brain craves familiarity. Now, here's where it gets even more interesting. Change doesn't just require effort, it requires identity shift. You can try to run every day, but if deep down you still believe, I'm not a runner, then eventually your actions will fall back into alignment with your identity. You can try to quit smoking, but if your inner narrative is still, I'm a smoker who's trying to quit, your brain will keep dragging you back. This is why neuroscientists and behavioral psychologists emphasize that true change happens not when you force yourself to act differently, but when you begin to see yourself differently. But of course, identity doesn't change overnight. It's built through consistent evidence, through repeated small wins that reinforce a new self-concept. And here's the painful truth. Most people never give themselves enough time. They expect transformation in weeks when it often takes months or even years. That's not a flaw, it's biology. Studies on habit formation suggest that the average time it takes to fully form a new habit isn't 21 days, as the cliche goes, but closer to 66 days, and often much longer depending on the behavior. And yet, most people give up far before that point, assuming they failed, when in reality they were just beginning. And maybe that's part of your story too. You've given up too early, convinced that your struggle was proof of failure rather than proof that you were doing something hard. Change always feels uncomfortable. It always comes with resistance. That's not a sign you're failing. That's a sign you're in the middle of rewiring your brain. But let's be honest here, knowing all of this doesn't magically make change easier. You could read every self-help book in the world, download all the productivity apps, listen to podcasts, watch motivational videos, and still find yourself stuck in the same loop. Why? Because deep down, there's often a gap between what you want and what you believe you deserve, and that gap quietly sabotages your efforts. For example, you might say you want success, but some part of you feels unworthy of it. You might say you want love, but some part of you fears intimacy. You might say you want to be healthy, but some part of you clings to the comfort of old routines. And until those subconscious beliefs are faced, no amount of surface-level effort will stick. Here's something sobering but liberating. Psychologists estimate that around 90 to 95% of our thoughts and behaviors come not from conscious choice, but from unconscious programming, which means most of your daily actions are being guided by scripts you didn't consciously write. Scripts picked up from your childhood, your culture, your environment. If you ever feel like you're acting against your own best interest, it's probably because you are. But not because you're broken, because you're running on code that was written long ago. So what does that mean for change? It means that to truly transform, you don't just need effort. You need awareness. You need to shine a light on the patterns running in the background. You need to pause long enough to ask, what's really driving me? What story am I repeating without even realizing it? Because until you see the pattern, you'll keep repeating it. And here's the irony. The very tools we often use to try to change, endless scrolling for tips, quick fix apps, surface level motivation, often keep us stuck. They distract us, overwhelm us with information, and leave us more paralyzed than empowered, which is why so many people live in a cycle of consuming inspiration without ever acting on it. They get the dopamine rush of imagining change, but never experience the deeper fulfillment of living it. So maybe the real starting point is not effort, but honesty. An honest look at where you are, at the beliefs that keep you circling the same path. Maybe change begins not with trying harder, but with slowing down enough to see clearly. Because clarity is what creates the space for new action, and action, repeated consistently, is what builds new identity. And maybe the most compassionate truth is this: if you've been unable to change despite all your effort, it doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're human. You're up against millions of years of evolution, a nervous system that craves safety, a brain that clings to the familiar. And yet, human beings are also capable of astonishing transformation. The same brain that resists change is also wired for growth, for learning, for adaptation. The very plasticity of your brain, the ability of your neural circuits to rewire, is the reason change is even possible at all. So the question is not, can I change? The question is, am I willing to walk through the discomfort, the resistance, the slow process of rewiring? Because that's what it takes. Not perfection, not sudden transformation, but a steady, patient willingness to keep going, even when it feels impossible. And here's where most people stumble. They underestimate the role of patience. We live in a culture of instant everything, instant messages, instant deliveries, instant entertainment. And so when we try to change, we expect the same kind of speed, but the human brain doesn't work on those timelines. Real transformation is slower, more fragile, and often invisible in the beginning. It feels like nothing is happening, even when everything is. That's why the greatest skill in change is not intensity, but consistency. Small, almost unnoticeable actions, repeated daily, compound into something extraordinary. There's a famous concept in psychology called the aggregation of marginal gains. It came from the world of professional cycling, where a coach transformed his team by focusing on tiny improvements in every area, just 1% better each day. Not dramatic overhauls, not giant leaps, but small steps that added up. And that same principle applies to you. Change doesn't happen because you suddenly wake up one day as a new person. It happens because you showed up again and again, even when it felt insignificant. But here's the challenge. Consistency is boring. The brain loves novelty. It craves stimulation. And so the hard, unglamorous truth is that change often feels dull before it feels rewarding. That's when most people give up, right before the breakthrough, when they mistake boredom for failure. But in reality, boredom is a signal that you're rewiring. It means your old patterns are losing their grip, and your brain is searching for something new. The real test is whether you can keep showing up in those moments. And it's not just about habits, it's about your environment. Studies show that your surroundings, the people you spend time with, even the cues in your physical space, shape your behavior more than willpower ever could. If you want to eat healthier, it's not about constantly resisting junk food. It's about not keeping it within reach. If you want to read more, it's not about forcing yourself. It's about leaving a book where your phone usually sits. Change is less about fighting your impulses and more about designing your environment so that the right choice is the easy choice. But let's go deeper, because even with the right environment, even with habits, there's still the matter of your inner world, the beliefs you carry. Neuroscience shows us that thoughts actually create physical changes in the brain. Neural circuits that fire together wire together. This means that the story you tell yourself over and over becomes self-fulfilling. If you constantly repeat, "I can't change," you're literally strengthening that neural pathway. But if you begin, even hesitantly, to say, "I am becoming the kind of person who changes," you start wiring something new. And yes, I know affirmations can feel cheesy, unrealistic, even forced. But the real point isn't the words, it's the repetition. The brain doesn't distinguish much between what's vividly imagined and what's real. Athletes use visualization for this reason. Rehearsing a skill in the mind activates many of the same neural pathways as physically doing it, which means every time you imagine yourself showing up, every time you practice believing a new identity, you're preparing your brain to make it real. But let's not ignore the emotional side, because change is not just a logical process, it's deeply emotional. If logic were enough, none of us would struggle. We know what to do: eat well, exercise, focus, save money. The steps aren't complicated. The problem is that logic doesn't override emotion. When stress hits, when fear rises, when comfort calls, emotions win. And so, the real art of change isn't about suppressing emotion. It's about learning to work with it. To pause in those moments of fear or craving and say, "I see you, I feel you, but I choose differently." That's not easy, but it's powerful. And here's something crucial. Change doesn't mean never failing again. In fact, failure is part of the process. Every slip-up, every relapse, every moment of going back to your old self, it's not the end of the story. It's feedback. It's data. It's showing you where the old patterns still live. Most people quit not because they failed, but because they interpreted failure as final. The truth is, the difference between those who change and those who don't is not that one group never falls, it's that they always get back up. Think of it this way. When a child learns to walk, they fall hundreds of times, but nobody says, "Well, I guess walking isn't for them." We understand that falling is part of learning, but as adults, we forget. We treat failure as proof of incapacity instead of proof of progress. What if you saw your setbacks not as signs of weakness, but as evidence that you're in the arena, trying, learning, rewiring? How different would your story of change be then? And maybe the most liberating realization is this: you don't need to wait until you feel ready. Readiness is a myth. Most people spend their lives waiting until they feel confident enough, motivated enough, certain enough. But that day rarely comes. The truth is, action creates readiness. You don't wait to feel confident before acting. You act, and confidence emerges from the act. You don't wait to feel disciplined. You practice small disciplines, and then you feel disciplined. Readiness is not a prerequisite, it's a result. And if you really think about it, that's the quiet miracle of change. It's not about becoming someone else, it's about returning to yourself. Beneath all the habits, all the coping mechanisms, all the fear and resistance, there's a version of you that's alive, capable, resilient. Change is not creating a new you from scratch. It's uncovering the you that's been buried under years of conditioning. But here's the paradox. You'll never reach a point where change is complete. Human beings are works in progress until the end, which means the goal is not perfection, not some final state of mastery, but constant evolution. You will fall, you will backslide, you will face resistance again and again, and that's okay, because every time you recommit, every time you return to the path, you strengthen the muscle of transformation. And maybe that's the final truth you need to hear. You are not stuck because you are incapable of change. You are stuck because you've been fighting change as if it's a battle to be won in one decisive moment. But it's not. It's a practice, a rhythm, a relationship with yourself. And like any relationship, it requires patience, compassion, forgiveness, and persistence. So the next time you wonder why you can't change, remember this. It's not because you're broken, it's because you're human. Your brain resists, your emotions resist, your habits resist. But none of that is the end of the story, because human beings are also wired to grow, to adapt, to evolve. The same system that holds you back can set you free, if you're willing to walk the slow, steady path of awareness and practice. So don't give up on yourself. Don't confuse resistance with impossibility. Don't let failure convince you that you're finished. Change is always harder and slower than we want it to be, but it's also always more possible than we dare to believe. And maybe, just maybe, the fact that you're still here, still listening, still asking the question, is proof that deep down, you haven't given up. And that matters, because as long as you keep showing up, as long as you keep taking even the smallest steps, you are changing, you are rewiring, you are becoming, and that's what life really is, a continuous becoming. Not perfect, not linear, not easy, but real. And real change, even if it takes time, is worth every ounce of effort. So here's your invitation. Stop waiting for the perfect moment. Stop demanding perfection from yourself. Start small. Start now. And when you fall, as you will, stand back up. Because the truth is, you are capable of so much more than you realize. And your life is not waiting for some future version of you to finally get it right. It's happening here, now, in this moment. And this moment is where change begins.